The jungle humidity clung to everything that morning. Sweat beaded on young faces. Cigarette smoke drifted through humid air. Aviation fuel created a sharp tang that burned the nostrils. 18 American fighters sat in darkness. Their pilots stood nearby in silence. These weren't battle-hardened veterans. College boys, mostly. Kids who should have been studying for finals or taking girls to movies. Instead, they faced the most dangerous mission of the Pacific War. What they didn't know would haunt them forever. The man they were hunting had never wanted this war. Admiral Yamamoto sat 435 miles away, finishing his final meal. He had no idea American codebreakers had spent 2 straight days cracking his travel plans. The irony cuts deep when you understand the full picture. This Japanese admiral had walked Harvard's campus in 1920. He'd played poker with American students, toured oil refineries across the Midwest, seen America's industrial power firsthand. When Japanese war hawks demanded conflict with America, Yamamoto's response chilled the room. 6 months of victories, maybe a year if they were lucky. After that, certain defeat. He'd been forced to plan Pearl Harbor. Duty demanded it. But privately, he knew Japan was sealing its own doom. Now his prophecy was about to become reality in the most personal way imaginable. The pre-dawn briefing was deliberately vague. Major Mitchell kept his voice low. A VIP target. That's all they needed to know. The pilots exchanged worried glances. What kind of VIP was worth risking 18 fighters on a suicide run? The fuel situation told them everything. Massive external tanks hung beneath each P-38. These tanks would make them sitting ducks against enemy fighters. But without them, they'd never make it home. The math was brutal. Exactly enough fuel to reach the target with 20 minutes of combat time. 20 minutes to find their prey, destroy it, and race back across 435 miles of empty ocean. At Rabaul Airfield, nervous aides surrounded Yamamoto. His staff begged him to change the schedule. General Imamura had barely survived an American fighter attack weeks earlier. The skies weren't safe. Vice Admiral Ozawa offered massive fighter escort. Dozens of Zeros to protect their most valuable commander. Yamamoto refused everything. Showing fear would crush morale. His men needed to see their admiral flying boldly, despite enemy threats. The 59-year-old commander climbed into his bomber carrying his ancestral samurai sword. Hidden in his personal safe was a poem written to his mistress. The final lines would prove eerily prophetic. The body grows weak, but the spirit endures. Henderson Field erupted with engine noise at exactly 7:10 a.m. 18 P-38 Lightnings thundered down the runway. Each carried standard fuel tanks plus oversized 330-gallon tanks, specially flown from New Guinea. Major Mitchell led them at wave-top level, 50 feet above the Pacific. Radio silence maintained for over 2 hours. Nothing but engine roar and ocean spray hitting windscreens. These college-age pilots were attempting the most technically demanding navigation of the war. Dead reckoning with 1940s equipment across 435 miles of empty ocean. Modern airline pilots would find this challenging. These kids were doing it while preparing for aerial combat. American codebreakers had worked around the clock for 48 straight hours. They knew everything. Yamamoto's exact schedule, his precise route, even which bomber he'd occupy. The intelligence seemed impossibly perfect. At 9:30 a.m., the western coast of Bougainville appeared ahead. Mitchell checked his watch. 3 minutes early. Perfect navigation after flying 435 miles at treetop height, with World War II instruments. Then, like something from a Hollywood script, 2 bombers materialized on the horizon. Exactly on schedule. 9:34 a.m., the moment that would haunt both nations. The radio crackled. Bogies at 11 o'clock high. 18 American pilots spotted their targets. But confusion hit immediately. Intelligence had said one bomber. 2 aircraft flew in formation ahead. Which one carried Japan's most important admiral? The Japanese formation cruised at 6,500 feet. 2 G-4M Betty bombers with 6-0 escorts. Admiral Yamamoto sat in the lead aircraft, completely unaware his exact position had been betrayed by intercepted communications. In the second bomber, Admiral Ugaki gazed out the window, probably thinking about the inspection they were heading to conduct. Neither man realized they had minutes to live. The Americans jettisoned their external fuel tanks and climbed hard. But disaster struck the killer flight immediately. One P-38 couldn't release its tank. The aircraft became uncontrollable. Both pilot and wingman were forced out of the attack. Only 2 fighters remained positioned to hit the bombers: Tom Lanphier and Rex Barber. 2 college kids against Japan's greatest naval hero and his escorts. The Zero fighters dove to intercept. Too late. The P-38 Lightning had been chosen specifically for its devastating firepower. 4 50-caliber machine guns plus a 20mm cannon. When those weapons struck the lightly built Betty bombers, destruction was instant and complete. Rex Barber's fighter shuddered as Japanese bullets tore through aluminum. Later inspection would reveal 104 holes, but his cannon was firing. 20mm shells ripped into the lead bomber's fuselage. The Betty didn't just suffer damage, it came apart. From the second bomber, Admiral Ugaki watched in absolute horror as his commander's aircraft began trailing black smoke. His diary entry later captured his shock. My God! Nothing else came to mind? I grabbed Officer Muroi's shoulder, pointed at the first plane. Look at the commander's aircraft. This became my final goodbye. The entire engagement lasted 20 minutes. Yamamoto's bomber spiraled into jungle canopy within seconds of being hit. The second Betty, carrying Ugaki, crashed into the ocean at full speed. Ugaki somehow survived, floated in Pacific waters, watching black smoke rise from where his commander and closest friend had just died. The young American pilots had no idea what they'd accomplished. They raced back toward Guadalcanal, fuel burning at alarming rates, probably thinking they'd destroyed just another Japanese transport. Lanphier and Barber were already arguing over who fired the fatal shots, a dispute that would consume both men for decades. The next morning brought horror to Japanese search teams. They hacked through dense bougainville jungle, following smoke trails from the crashed bomber. What they discovered would traumatize Japan forever. Admiral Yamamoto's body had been thrown from the wreckage, but remained strapped to his seat. His right hand clutched his samurai sword. The autopsy revealed 2 bullet wounds, jaw and shoulder. Death had been instantaneous before the crash even occurred. The medical report described finding him in great dignity. Imagine the psychological shock rippling through the recovery team. This wasn't just any casualty. Japan's greatest naval hero, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man the entire nation considered invincible. Americans had reached him. In the middle of nowhere, 435 miles from their base, flying against impossible odds, they had found and killed Japan's most protected leader. The psychological impact was immediate and crushing. Japan concealed Yamamoto's death for an entire month. Officials desperately tried to process what this meant for their war effort. When they finally announced it on May 21st, the nation entered mourning unlike anything since the previous emperor's death. The shockwaves went far beyond military circles. Here's where the story becomes deeply human and tragic. Everyone involved was changed forever by those 20 minutes of combat. Tom Lanphier spent his remaining years claiming credit for killing Yamamoto. He gave interviews, wrote articles, became famous as the pilot who shot down Japan's greatest admiral. But Rex Barber, whose P-38 returned with 104 bullet holes, insisted he fired the fatal rounds. The argument consumed both men for decades. Friendships ended. Reputations were staked on competing claims. In 1991, 4 years after Lanphier's death, the Air Force conducted an official investigation. They concluded Barber, not Lanphier, had fired the shots that killed Yamamoto. Lanphier posthumously lost his ace status. His kill count dropped from 5 to 4 confirmed victories. The deeper tragedy goes beyond personal disputes. These young men never fully grasped what they'd accomplished. They'd killed a grandfather figure. Yamamoto was 59, old enough to be their grandfather. They'd eliminated not just Japan's greatest admiral, but a man who privately opposed the very war he was forced to fight. A leader who understood his nation was doomed, but continued serving out of duty and honor. For Japan, losing Yamamoto was like losing their compass during a typhoon. His replacement, Admiral Koga, later admitted the obvious. Only one Yamamoto existed. No one could replace him. Japanese naval strategy never recovered its innovative edge. The creative thinking that had produced Pearl Harbor died in that jungle with its architect. The ripple effects extended far beyond military tactics. Yamamoto's death shattered Japanese belief in their own invincibility. If Americans could reach their most protected leader, what remained safe? The psychological warfare proved perhaps more valuable than any conventional military victory. Japanese morale began its long, irreversible decline. Admiral Ugaki, the sole witness to Yamamoto's final moments, never recovered emotionally. He went on to command Japanese battleships at Leyte Gulf, but the war was already lost. His heart remained buried in that Bougainville jungle. In August 1945, hours after Emperor Hirohito announced surrender, Ugaki climbed into a kamikaze aircraft for one final mission. He was shot down and killed. The last kamikaze pilot of World War II, still trying to join his commander in death. This story resonates today because it reveals war's deeply personal costs. In our era of drone strikes and smart weapons, we've almost forgotten that conflict ultimately involves individual human beings making split-second decisions that change history. Consider the incredible chain of events. American codebreakers working 48 consecutive hours to decrypt one message. 18 young pilots flying the most challenging navigation mission of their lives. A Japanese admiral who knew his country was doomed but continued fighting from duty. All converging in 20 minutes of aerial combat that shifted the Pacific War's entire trajectory. Most importantly, this story demonstrates that individual character matters even in global warfare. Yamamoto, despite planning Pearl Harbor, was honorable and privately opposed the conflict. The American pilots, despite their youth, displayed incredible courage and skill under impossible pressure. Admiral Ugaki showed loyalty beyond death itself. These weren't cartoon villains or propaganda heroes. They were complex human beings caught in global war's machinery, each trying to fulfill their duty as they understood it. The courage displayed by both sides on April 18, 1943, reminds us that heroism transcends nationality. It's about individual character under extreme pressure. Next time military conflicts appear in news reports, remember this date. Remember that behind every strategic decision, every tactical victory, every casualty statistic, individual human stories exist of courage, tragedy, honor, and devastating loss. History isn't about nations and armies alone, it's about people. Young American pilots who never expected to kill a legend. A Japanese admiral who died clutching his ancestral sword. A chief of staff who spent his final months trying to join his commander in death. 20 minutes. 18 fighters. 2 bombers. The course of World War II changed forever. The final image haunts visitors to a Tokyo museum today. Admiral Yamamoto's samurai sword, recovered from that jungle crash site, displayed behind glass. A silent reminder of the day when 20 minutes changed the Pacific War forever. Weather conditions that morning were perfect for flying. Clear skies stretched endlessly over the Solomon Islands. Visibility unlimited. No storms threatened the mission. Nature itself seemed to conspire in this moment of destiny. The psychological preparation had been intense. These pilots knew they faced either glory or death. No middle ground existed on this mission. Success meant becoming heroes. Failure meant disappearing into the vast Pacific. Training had prepared them technically, but not emotionally. How do you prepare college-age minds for eliminating one of history's most significant military figures? How do you process the weight of changing world events? The weapon systems aboard each P-38 represented cutting-edge 1943 technology. Synchronized machine guns fired through propeller arcs without hitting blades. The 20mm cannon packed devastating punch against lightly armored aircraft. But technology meant nothing without human skill and courage. These pilots had to find tiny targets across hundreds of miles of ocean, engage superior numbers of enemy fighters, and return home with minimal fuel reserves. The intelligence breakthrough that made this mission possible represents one of World War II's greatest code-breaking achievements. American cryptographers had cracked Japan's most secure naval communication codes. They knew not just Yamamoto's schedule, but his exact route, altitude, escort strength, and aircraft type. The intelligence was so detailed, it seemed almost too good to be true. Japanese security protocols should have prevented this breach, but routine communications had become sloppy. Regular schedule updates were transmitted using compromised codes. Fatal mistakes in what should have been impenetrable security. The flight formation that morning represented tactical perfection. Major Mitchell arranged his fighters to maximize their chances while minimizing Japanese response time. Every aircraft had specific assignments and backup roles. Navigation challenges were enormous. Dead reckoning across 435 miles of empty ocean with 1943 instruments required exceptional skill. Wind drift calculations, fuel consumption monitoring, course corrections based on visual landmarks. 1 degree of error over that distance would mean missing the target entirely. These pilots achieved airline-level precision while preparing for aerial combat. The Zero fighters escorting Yamamoto represented Japan's most advanced aircraft technology. Highly maneuverable, experienced pilots, superior numbers in the immediate combat zone. But they were positioned for escort duty, not interception. Their formation prioritized protecting the bombers, not engaging attacking fighters. This tactical decision proved fatal. The Betty bombers were fast for their era, but lightly built, designed for long-range missions rather than survivability under attack. When American cannon shells hit them, structural failure was inevitable. Yamamoto's final minutes remain a subject of historical speculation. Did he see the American fighters approaching? Did he realize the significance of this encounter? Did he understand his prophecies about American industrial might were coming true? His personal effects recovered from the crash site included his sword, military decorations, and personal papers. Everything suggested a man prepared for death. carrying symbols of honor and duty into his final battle. The American pilot's return flight became its own drama. Fuel gauges dropping toward empty. No radio contact with base until they reached maximum range. Every minute bringing them closer to ditching in the Pacific. Weather conditions began deteriorating. Cloud cover increased. Visibility decreased. What had been perfect flying weather that morning was turning dangerous for the return journey. Several aircraft barely made it to Henderson Field. Engines sputtering from fuel exhaustion as wheels touched down. Minutes later would have meant certain death in Pacific waters. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Pilots were debriefed, while exhaustion and adrenaline clouded their memories. Claims and counterclaims about who fired fatal shots began immediately. Intelligence officers tried to piece together exactly what had happened. Had they actually killed Yamamoto? Which aircraft had he been in? Were there any survivors to interrogate? Japanese search and rescue efforts were hampered by dense jungle and hostile territory. Finding the crash sites required days of dangerous overland travel through areas controlled by Allied forces. The discovery of Yamamoto's body created immediate security concerns. How had Americans known his exact schedule and location? Had Japanese communications been compromised? How extensive was the intelligence breach? Recovery of his personal effects became a matter of national honor. His samurai sword carried centuries of family tradition. His military decorations represented a lifetime of service to the emperor. The autopsy results were kept classified for decades. Japanese officials didn't want to acknowledge how completely American intelligence had penetrated their communications. Medical examination revealed death had been instant. The bullets had struck vital areas immediately. Yamamoto probably never knew what hit him. A small mercy in this larger tragedy. The psychological impact on Japanese naval officers was profound. If their greatest leader wasn't safe, who was? How could they continue fighting an enemy that seemed to know their every move? American celebration was muted initially. The full significance wasn't immediately apparent. Only gradually did officials realize they had eliminated Japan's most capable strategic mind. The ripple effects would continue for months. Japanese naval operations became more cautious, less innovative. The creative thinking that had characterized early war operations disappeared with Yamamoto's death. His replacement faced impossible expectations. How do you follow a legend? How do you maintain morale after such a devastating loss? How do you continue fighting a war your predecessor knew was unwinnable? The personal cost to everyone involved would echo through their remaining lives. Success in war often carries its own burden. These young pilots had changed history, but at what personal cost? Years later, survivors would struggle with their fame. Being known as the men who killed Yamamoto brought celebrity, but also psychological weight. They had eliminated an enemy, but also a fellow human being. The dispute over credit for the kill revealed how individual recognition matters even in team efforts. Personal glory versus collective achievement. Individual heroism versus group success. Modern analysis suggests both Lanfear and Barber contributed to Yamamoto's death. Multiple aircraft fired at the bombers simultaneously. Determining who fired fatal shots was probably impossible from the beginning. But human nature demands individual heroes. Someone has to be credited with changing history. Someone has to be remembered as the person who eliminated Japan's greatest admiral. The truth probably lies in collective achievement. 18 pilots working together. Hundreds of ground crew maintaining aircraft. Dozens of intelligence officers breaking codes. Thousands of support personnel making the mission possible. Yet, history remembers individual names. Tom Lanphier and Rex Barber became famous, while their wingmen remained obscure. Fame falls unevenly even among heroes. The final accounting reveals war's essential tragedy. Brave men on both sides doing their duty. Honor and courage displayed by Americans and Japanese alike. Death coming to good people, caught in global conflict. 20 minutes changed everything. But the human cost would last lifetimes.